My name is Yadi, and I am 34 years old. In telling this story, I'm not speaking from the arrogant perch of a successfully recovered gambler, nor as a loser begging for pity. I'm just a survivor, one who has barely managed to crawl out from the rubble of his own self-destruction, still bearing the burns. I hope that by reconstructing every detail of this disaster, I can show you how the road to hell was first paved with flowers and applause. For the first 32 years, my life story was the epitome of a model existence, at least on the surface. It was the kind of template that would make my parents puff out their chests with pride in front of friends and family. I graduated from Stanford University with a degree in computer science and worked as a senior software engineer at a prestigious tech company in Silicon Valley. My job was to deal with logic and data. I believed in the purity and precision of code. My life, much like the programs I wrote, was precise, efficient, and followed a preset logic toward a successful outcome. A beautiful house with a garden in Palo Alto, a wonderful wife named Sarah, a salary exceeding $300,000 a year, and a clear career path toward management. On weekends, we would go wine tasting in Napa Valley. On holidays, we'd fly to Hawaii to soak up the sun. We were planning to have a child within 2 years, and had even prepared a room for him or her, the walls painted a soft beige. I used to firmly believe that success and failure in life were determined by intellect, self-discipline, and hard work. Deep down, I was contemptuous of those who indulged in vices and made a mess of their lives. I saw them as weak-willed losers, erroneous variables in the algorithm of life. Gambling? In my view, it was a game for fools who were bad at math and didn't understand probability. I would even hold forth at gatherings with friends, analyzing the mathematical models behind Las Vegas casinos, using the law of large numbers and the house edge to explain their inevitable victory, and scoffing at those who dreamed of winning. I thought I would never become one of them. I was wrong, terribly wrong. Not only did I become one of them, but I fell 10,000 feet further than the worst predicament I could have ever imagined. The story didn't begin in a glittering casino, but on a normal Sunday afternoon, on the comfortable sofa in my living room. At the time, online sports betting was becoming legalized and popular across the United States. My friends, a group of self-proclaimed smart engineers and analysts like myself, had a WhatsApp group dedicated to discussing NBA and NFL games. They weren't just fans, they treated the games as a feast of data analysis. They analyzed player stats, historical data, coaching tactics, and even the weather's impact on the game. To me, it sounded more like an intellectual challenge than gambling. My first bet stemmed from an argument with my friend David. We had different opinions on the outcome of a Golden State Warriors game. To prove my analysis was correct, I downloaded the app that would later drag me to hell and put down $100. "See, Yadi? This is just to make the game a little more interesting," David said casually. I won that bet. I got back $180. The thrill of that $80 profit was far greater than the feeling of a few thousand extra dollars on my paycheck. It was a sense of intellectual superiority, of having beaten the system, a tremendous satisfaction that my judgment had been validated by the market. I began to invest more time in research, treating it as a serious side hustle. I created complex Excel spreadsheets and wrote web crawlers to scrape all kinds of data, attempting to build a perfect model to predict game outcomes. For the first few months, I did quite well. The number in my account grew steadily, at one point reaching over $50,000. I bragged to Sarah about my winnings, calling it a data-driven alternative investment. Although she had her doubts, my confident smile and seemingly professional analysis kept her from interfering too much. I used the money I won to buy her a designer bag she'd long coveted and took her to a 3-Michelin-star restaurant. The nonchalance of spending money like water made me feel, for the first time, like I was the master of the universe. I even remember one time I placed a complex parlay bet. With a $1,000 stake, I was on the verge of winning $200,000. After correctly predicting 7 game outcomes, only one was left. I could feel the blood roaring in my veins, adrenaline making my entire body tremble. It was the ultimate thrill of being on the cusp of controlling destiny. However, in the final game, an insignificant free throw in the final moments flipped the spread. $200,000 vanished in an instant. But strangely, what I felt wasn't regret, but extreme excitement. I was so close. My model worked. That near win, that massive sum that was almost in my grasp, was like a drug that completely shattered my last defense against risk. I felt I wasn't gambling, I was investing. Next time, I would surely succeed. From that day on, I started increasing my stakes. $5,000, $10,000, sometimes tens of thousands of dollars on a single game. The turning point came during that season's playoffs. I was supremely confident in a model I had built, and, during a crucial series, I bet all my winnings in the account, nearly $70,000. I stayed up all night, eyes glued to the anemic score on the screen, my heart pounding violently with every possession. With 0.3 seconds left, a three-point buzzer beater I hadn't anticipated at all shattered my confidence, along with the $70,000. In that moment, my first reaction wasn't to admit my model's failure, but anger. A furious sense of betrayal and injustice. I told myself it was just a fluke, a low-probability event. If I just bet more, I could win it all back. From that moment, the disguise of investing was torn away, and the naked gambler's mindset took over my brain. I was no longer trying to prove I was smart. I was just chasing my losses. I started dipping into my savings. First 10,000, then 30, then 50. The money I lost became a growing black hole, frantically devouring my sanity and my wealth. My life was split in two. By day, I was the star engineer who spoke eloquently in meetings and wrote elegant code. By night, I was a desperate, paranoid gambler betting on meaningless basketball leagues in Eastern Europe or table tennis matches in Russia, games whose rules I didn't even understand. I even started betting on esports. I just needed the action of placing a bet, the thrill of waiting for the outcome, to numb my fear of reality. To hide all this, I became an expert liar. When Sarah asked why I was so distracted lately, I told her I was under immense pressure from a project. When she asked why the savings in our joint account were dwindling so quickly, I made up excuses, making an early mortgage payment, an emergency investment in a friend's company, even lying that part of my bonus was delayed. My lies became more practiced, and my panic grew. Every time I saw the trust in her eyes, I felt a pinprick of shame, but that shame was quickly drowned by the temptation of the next bet. I even learned to fake bank statement screenshots to answer her questions. I maxed out all my credit cards and then secretly started applying for new ones. When all my credit lines were exhausted, I turned to my friends. I went to David, the friend who had first introduced me to betting. I fabricated a story about a family emergency and borrowed $50,000 from him. He didn't suspect a thing, transferred the money immediately, and patted me on the shoulder, saying, "Brother, if you're in trouble, you have to speak up." That money didn't last a weekend in my hands before it all vanished into that bottomless online account. Then, using the same methods, I went after other friends and colleagues. The reputation I had built over the years became the capital I used to overdraft my future. Finally, the lies became impossible to maintain. Sarah and David joined forces for an intervention. When I came home from work that day and saw them sitting in the living room with serious expressions, my heart sank. On the coffee table, there were no bank letters, just David's phone showing our transfer history and a printout from Sarah of the real transaction history of our joint account. "Yadi, we need to talk." Sarah's voice was calm, but beneath the calm was immense sadness. David was angry and disappointed. "The money I lent you was for your family's medical bills, not for you to throw away. What the hell are you doing?" In that instant, all my defense mechanisms activated. I felt no remorse. Instead, I flew into a rage. "It's my money. My business. What does it have to do with you? Are you interrogating me?" I roared, using anger to mask my fear. I accused Sarah of not trusting me, accused David of meddling. The conversation devolved into an ugly fight. I used the most vicious words I could find, twisting their concern into an attempt to control and judge me. Finally, I stormed out, slamming the door, and pounded on the steering wheel of my car, not out of remorse, but out of the shame and anger of having my secret world exposed. That failed intervention was the last straw. Sarah grew silent. Her eyes became vacant. Our communication was reduced to the bare necessities of life. Home was no longer a sanctuary but a cold stage where we played the part of distant roommates. The final explosion came in the form of a collections letter from an online loan company. The shocking interest rates and snowballing late fees completely exposed my fabricated financial situation. When Sarah saw the letter, she said nothing. She just quietly walked into the bedroom and started packing her bags. I followed her, trying to take her hand, repeating vows I didn't even believe myself. "Honey, just give me one more chance. I swear this is the last time. I can win it back. I can win it all back." She pulled her hand away and looked at me for the first time with the eyes of a stranger. "Yadi," she said, "the man I loved, the smart, kind, responsible you, has been killed by your own hands. I don't know who this stranger in front of me is. I can't save you. I can only save myself." She walked out the door we had once painted together, pulling her suitcase behind her. The moment the door closed, I felt my entire world collapse with it. I didn't chase after her, because I knew she was right. I sold my car, but the money was a drop in the bucket against my massive debt. Calls and emails from collection agencies flooded in. I was fired from my job. My mental state and the exposure of my debt problems made me unfit to work. I had lost Sarah, lost my friends, lost my career. Finally, I had to make the call I least wanted to, the one I was most ashamed to make, to my parents in their small town in Ohio. My father answered. When I heard his old, familiar voice, the tears burst forth. Sobbing uncontrollably, I poured out all the dirty, shameful secrets of the past 2 years, a total debt of nearly $1.5 million. There was a long, suffocating silence on the other end. I could picture my elderly father, holding the phone in his old study, his body trembling. "Son," he finally said, his voice as hoarse as if it had been scraped with sandpaper, just make sure you're safe for now." They didn't utter a single word of blame. But that calmness cut me deeper than any angry tirade. For my sake, my parents, who had been frugal their whole lives and never splurged on travel, made a devastating decision. They sold the house they had lived in their entire lives, a house that held half a lifetime of memories. That house held the doodles I had drawn on the walls as a child, my mother's beloved rose bushes. They sent me most of the proceeds from the sale, plus their life savings, their 401k retirement fund they had set aside for a peaceful old age, all to fill the bottomless pit I had dug. A few months later, I went back to Ohio. They had moved into a small, rented apartment. It was crammed with furniture salvaged from the old house, looking cramped and cluttered. My father's beloved gardening tools were piled in a corner of the balcony, rusting, because there was no garden for him here. My mother was busy in the kitchen, her back more stooped than I remembered. At the dinner table, they didn't say a word about the debt, just kept putting food in my bowl and asking if it was cold in California, if work was going well. Their cautious affection felt like countless red-hot needles piercing my heart. After dinner, as I helped my father sort through old things, I saw him wearing his reading glasses, painstakingly studying a brochure on how to apply for Social Security. In that moment, I couldn't bear it anymore. I rushed to the bathroom, fell to my knees, and dry-heaved silently, as if trying to vomit out my very soul. Back in California, I hit rock bottom. I lived in a filthy motel, sleeping during the day and staring at the ceiling at night. I made concrete plans to end it all, feeling death was the only escape. One night, I stood by the railing of the Golden Gate Bridge, the cold sea wind making me shiver. Just as I was about to take that step forward, my phone rang. It was my father. He didn't ask where I was. He just said in a tired but gentle voice, "Adi, no matter what happens, come home soon. Mom baked your favorite apple pie." That apple pie saved me. It made me realize I didn't have the right to die so selfishly, to leave the mess I created in endless grief for the people who still loved me. For months ago, I walked into a Gamblers Anonymous meeting. I remember standing at the door of the community center for a full 10 minutes, too scared to push it open. My pride, my pathetic and long-shattered self-esteem, was putting up a final resistance. Eventually, I went in. Inside, there were a dozen or so people, men and women, old and young, of all races, all looking like ordinary people you'd meet on the street. But when they began to share, I heard my own story, repeated in different versions from their mouths. When it was my turn, I stood up and said with a trembling voice, "My name is Adi, and I'm a compulsive gambler." Saying that sentence was 10,000 times harder than admitting I had lost $1.5 million. But the moment I said it, the invisible mountain on my shoulders felt, for the first time, a little lighter. Every day of recovery is a battle. I moved out of the motel and rented the cheapest small studio I could find in the East Bay. I found a manual labor job in a warehouse. The pay is meager, and I'm bone-tired every day. It's a world away from my old job, sitting in an ergonomic chair, tapping on a keyboard, and changing the world. Once, a foreman a decade younger than me chewed me out in front of everyone because the boxes I stacked were not neat enough. A wave of humiliation washed over me. I almost took off my work clothes and walked out right there. But on the way home, clutching the few damp, honest bills in my pocket, I suddenly understood that this was real life. This sense of solidity was something no amount of virtual winnings could ever compare to. I'm starting to learn how to live again. Learning to savor the aroma of a cup of coffee instead of calculating its price. Learning to walk in the park and enjoy the sunset instead of staring at odds on my phone. Learning to sleep soundly at night instead of waiting, high on adrenaline, for the result of a distant game. I wrote letters of apology to everyone I had hurt, not to beg for forgiveness, but simply to admit my mistakes and take responsibility for my actions. Most of the letters went unanswered. I understand, and I accept that. My life has been torn to shreds by gambling. The future is a fog. I don't know how many years it will take to pay off all my debts, whether Sarah will ever be willing to see me again, or if I'll ever have the chance to be a good son to my parents. But I have no retreat. I have to keep going, even if it takes the rest of my life to slowly, piece by piece, glue back together the life I personally shattered.